3 weeks passed, and the galaxy learned what silence sounded like. It did not happen all at once. At first, the Council treated humanity's withdrawal the way an old teacher might treat a child storming out of a classroom, with a shake of the head and the quiet confidence that the child would return once it calmed down. High Arbiter Vorathan addressed the plenary session 2 days after Danny Holt's departure, and assured every delegation that the situation was temporary. Humans were young, he said. They were emotional. They would come back when they realized how much they needed the Council. But the days turned into weeks, and the humans did not come back. The first sign that something was wrong came from the trade lanes. Human merchant ships, which had once carried goods along dozens of established routes across Council space, were gone. The lanes were not closed. Anyone could fly them, but the ships that had filled them with cargo were simply no longer there. They had all returned to human space, quietly and without fuss, like birds flying home before a storm. Trade Regent Omrathi of the Velori Commerce Pact was the first senior figure to raise the alarm. The Velori were not warriors. They were merchants, and they understood money the way other species understood gravity. It was the force that held everything together. Omrathi stood before the emergency plenary session and laid out the numbers in her calm, precise way. 17% of the Galactic Council's combined economic output had depended on human trade. That number alone was startling for a species that had only been part of the community for 6 decades. But the details were worse. Human-manufactured biosynthetic compounds supplied medical stations across the outer spiral arms. Human agricultural gene sequences had been licensed to over 30 species to improve their food production. Human computational systems ran the backbone of at least a dozen minor economies. All of it was now frozen. 3 species in the outer regions will face food shortages within 4 months, Omrathi said. 2 more will face medical supply crises within 6. This is not a political inconvenience. This is an economic wound, and it is bleeding. The chamber was quieter this time. The shouting from 3 weeks ago had been replaced by something heavier. The slow, uncomfortable realization that humanity had mattered more than anyone wanted to admit. Ambassador Sulan of the Keth Dominion tried a different approach. She was a skilled political operator, elegant and sharp, and she understood that the longer the silence lasted, the worse it would get. She reached out to Danny Holt through unofficial back channels, using a private communication frequency that both governments maintained for sensitive conversations. Danny took the call. He sat in his quarters aboard the diplomatic outpost, a small station orbiting a neutral moon far from Council space, and listened as Seolan made her offer. The Keth Dominion would broker a quiet return. No public apology, no humiliation. Just a quiet resolution that restored human membership and buried the entire incident. She made it sound reasonable. She made it sound easy. Danny had received his instructions from Katie Marsh before the call. He delivered them without emotion. "The Federation appreciates your interest, Ambassador," he said, "but we are not interested in returning to a system that conspired against us. If the Council wishes to address what happened, it can do so publicly and honestly. We will not be smuggled back in through a side door." Seelan stared at him through the screen for a long moment. In her entire career, she had never seen a junior species refuse an offer like this. They always came back. The galaxy was too big and too dangerous to go it alone, and every young civilization eventually learned that lesson. She told Danny as much. "Perhaps," Danny said, "but we would rather learn it on our own terms than live on yours." The call ended. Seelan sat alone in her chambers for a long time afterward, and for the first time in many years, she felt something close to doubt. Back on Earth, the mood was tense but steady. Katie Marsh understood that the withdrawal would hurt. Human colonies in the outer systems had relied on Council trade networks for income. Businesses that exported to alien markets, were suddenly cut off. There were job losses, supply disruptions, and a growing anxiety among the public about what came next. Katie addressed the people of Earth in a broadcast that reached every colony, station, and outpost in human space. She stood behind a simple podium with no flags and no ceremony, and she spoke plainly. "I know this is difficult," she said. "I know many of you are wondering why we walked away from the largest political body in the galaxy. The answer is simple. We were betrayed. Our rights were taken from us in secret by governments that called themselves our partners. A second resolution was being drafted that would have placed foreign monitoring stations around our own sun. We were not asked. We were not told. We were simply managed, like a problem to be contained." She paused and looked directly into the camera. "We did not leave because we are angry. We left because we respect ourselves too much to stay where we are not respected. I am asking you to be patient. I am asking you to trust that this Federation will find its own way forward. It will not be easy, but it will be ours." The speech was effective. Public support for the withdrawal held firm, though it was not universal. There were protests in some colonies, debates in the media, and plenty of voices arguing that Earth had made a terrible mistake. Katie accepted the criticism without complaint. Democracy meant people could disagree, and she would not pretend that this decision was painless. Meanwhile, Sam Novak's intelligence teams were digging deeper into the origins of Resolution 4117. What they found was worse than anyone had expected. The resolution had not been a sudden decision. It was the product of decades of quiet lobbying by the Keth Dominion and the Zorath hegemony. Both species had watched humanity's rapid technological growth with increasing alarm. In just 60 years, humans had gone from a curiosity to a genuine economic and scientific power, and the older civilizations did not like what that meant for the balance of power they had maintained for centuries. The containment strategy had been methodical. First, limit human voting rights, then place monitoring stations around Sol system. A third phase, still in early discussion, would have restricted human access to certain advanced technologies under the guise of safety regulations. The goal was not to destroy humanity. It was to cap it, to keep it useful but manageable, like a tool that was never allowed to grow sharp enough to cut. Sam presented these findings to the cabinet in a secure briefing room. The silence that followed was heavy. Greg Loomis broke it first. "So they were building a cage," he said, "one bar at a time." "Yes," Sam said, "and they were almost finished." On the Galactic Council station, cracks were beginning to show. The minor species, the ones who had benefited most from human generosity, from the medical supplies and agricultural technology that Earth had shared freely, were starting to ask uncomfortable questions. Why had they not been told about Resolution 4117? Who had voted for it? Why had it been hidden? High Arbiter Vorthan refused to release the voting records. He argued that internal council proceedings were confidential, and that transparency in this case would set a dangerous precedent. His words were careful, but the effect was the opposite of what he intended. By refusing to answer, he confirmed what everyone was beginning to suspect. There was something in those records that the council's leadership did not want anyone to see. Far from the politics and the arguments, Admiral Laura Briggs sat in the command chair of the warship Ironclad, watching her tactical display. The Second Fleet had taken up position along the outer boundary of human space, not aggressively, not provocatively, but clearly and visibly. Every ship was running with weapons cold and sensors active, watching the darkness for any sign of movement. Laura had served in the fleet for 28 years. She had never fired a shot in anger, and she hoped she never would. But she was not naive. She had read Sam Novak's intelligence reports, and she knew that silence did not always mean peace. Sometimes silence meant someone was deciding what to do next. She opened a channel to every ship captain in the fleet and spoke 5 words. Weapons cold, eyes open. Then she sat back and watched the stars, and she waited. 2 months after humanity walked out of the Galactic Council, the first cracks became fractures. It started with the Poluri. They were a small species from a cold world at the edge of the spiral arm. Quiet, careful people who had never raised their voice in the council chamber in over 300 years of membership. Their economy was modest, their military nearly non-existent, and their population barely filled 2 planets. In the vast machinery of galactic politics, they were almost invisible. But the Poluri had a long memory, and they remembered what humanity had done for them. 12 years ago, a genetic blight had swept through their primary food crop, threatening famine across their homeworld. It was the humans who had responded first, sending agricultural specialists and gene therapy technology that saved the harvest, and with it, several million lives. The Poluri had never forgotten. When the Poluri ambassador rose in the council chamber and announced that her government was suspending its membership, the room went very still. She was joined within minutes by the ambassadors of the Omsai and the Dravine, 2 other minor species who had their own reasons to stand with humanity. Together, the 3 of them read a joint statement that condemned Resolution 4117 and the secrecy surrounding it. They called on the Council to release the full voting records, and they declared that they could not remain part of an institution that treated its members with such dishonesty. High Arbiter Vorathan, who had been replaced by a temporary chairman after his growing inability to control the sessions, watched from the upper gallery. His gray face showed nothing, but his hands, resting on the railing, were trembling. In 900 years, the Council had never lost a member. Now it had lost 4 in 2 months. The reaction from the major powers was swift and divided. Ambassador Sulan of the Keth Dominion called for calm. She argued that the departures were emotional, not rational, and that the Council should focus on economic recovery rather than political drama. Privately, she was furious. The Keth had spent decades building their influence within the Council, and now that influence was dissolving like sand in water. War Speaker Thrawn of the Zorath hegemony took a very different approach. He was a massive figure, even by the standards of his species, broad-shouldered, scarred, and utterly convinced that strength was the only language the galaxy truly understood. He stood before the Council and argued that humanity's withdrawal was not a diplomatic matter. It was a strategic threat. A species that left the Council was a species that could not be controlled. And a species that could not be controlled was a species that needed to be contained by force. He proposed that the hegemony secure the trade routes that humanity had abandoned, before other powers, or worse, the humans themselves, could use them for military advantage. It was a land grab dressed up in the language of security, and everyone in the chamber knew it. Seolan opposed him, not because she cared about humanity, but because she understood that a military move would shatter what was left of the Council's unity. The debate raged for hours, and when it was over, no resolution had been passed. The Council was deadlocked, unable to move forward, unable to go back, and unable to agree on anything at all. While the politicians argued, real people suffered. The Poluri and the Omsai, having left the Council, found themselves cut off from the trade networks and mutual aid systems they had depended on. Their economies, already fragile, began to wobble. Food shipments slowed. Medical supplies thinned. It was one thing to make a principled stand. It was another to feed your people while making it. Katie Marsh saw this, and she made a decision that some in her cabinet questioned. "We are not going to let them starve because they stood with us," she told Greg Loomis during a late-night meeting. "That is not who we are." She authorized a series of covert supply missions to the Poluri and Omsai homeworlds. The missions would be run by Captain Ethan Cole and his crew aboard the deep space frigate Starfall, a fast and nimble ship that could slip through the gaps between Council-monitored trade lanes without being detected. The supplies would include food, medical equipment, and agricultural technology, enough to keep both species stable while longer-term solutions were worked out. Ethan Cole was a quiet man with steady hands and a reputation for getting things done without making a fuss about it. He had joined the fleet at 19, worked his way up through cargo runs and border patrols, and earned command of the Starfall through competence rather than ambition. When he received his orders, he did not ask questions. He loaded his ship and went. The supply runs were dangerous. Council patrol ships were watching the space around the breakaway species, not with hostile intent, but with the kind of watchful suspicion that could turn hostile if someone made a wrong move. Ethan and his crew navigated these patrols with patience and skill, slipping through sensor gaps and timing their jumps to avoid detection. The Peluri received their first shipment of human grain and medical supplies on a cold morning on their homeworld, and the relief on the faces of the dock workers was something Ethan's crew would remember for a long time. Far from the supply runs, Nora Pruitt was doing work of a different kind. Operating from the neutral diplomatic outpost, Nora had become the quiet center of a growing web of communication. In the weeks following the withdrawal, she had received discreet inquiries from not 3, not 5, but 14 different species. Some were minor powers who had always felt overlooked by the Council. Others were mid-tier civilizations who had watched the events of the past 2 months with growing unease. A few were species that had never been Council members at all, kept out by the same political games that had been used against humanity. They all wanted to know the same thing. What was humanity going to do next? Nora reported these conversations to Danny Holt and Katie Marsh. She was careful not to overstate what she was hearing. These were inquiries, not commitments, but the pattern was clear. The Council's authority had been built on the assumption that there was no alternative, that every species needed the Council more than the Council needed them. Humanity's departure had broken that assumption, and now others were beginning to imagine what a different future might look like. Some of them are talking about trade agreements, Nora told Danny during one of their evening briefings. Some want military cooperation, but a few of them are thinking bigger. They are asking whether the galaxy needs a new kind of institution altogether. Danny listened carefully. He was not ready to push that idea yet. It was too soon, too fragile, but he filed it away. The seeds were there. They just needed time. Time, however, was something the galaxy might not have. Sam Novak delivered his latest intelligence briefing to the cabinet on a Thursday morning, and the room grew very cold as he spoke. His analysts had been tracking fleet movements across the galaxy, and the picture they painted was troubling. The Zorath hegemony had been quietly repositioning its military assets over the past 3 weeks. Capital ships, support vessels, and troop transports were gathering along the border of human space in numbers that far exceeded any normal patrol. "It is not an invasion force," Sam said carefully. "Not yet. But it is significantly more than a show of strength. They are positioning for something." Greg Loomis leaned forward. "How long before they are ready to move?" "If they continue at the current pace, 4 to 6 weeks, Sam said. Katie looked at the map on the screen, the thin line of human space, the vast territory of the Zorath hegemony pressing against it like a fist against a wall. She thought about her people, about the colonies and stations and families that lived along that border. She thought about the Peluri and the Omsai, who had risked everything because they believed humanity was worth standing with. She turned to the screen where Laura Briggs was watching from the bridge of the Ironclad. "Admiral, move the Third Fleet into a supporting position behind the Second. Full readiness, but keep weapons cold. I do not want to start a war, but I want to be ready if one comes to us." Laura nodded. "Understood, Madam Secretary." That night, Danny Holt sat alone in his quarters on the diplomatic outpost. The room was small and plain. A desk, a bed, a viewport showing the stars. He was tired, the kind of tired that sleep could not fix. His screen chimed with an incoming message. It was not through official channels. It was a personal communication, routed through several layers of encryption. The sender was High Arbiter Vorthan. Danny opened it. The message was short, just a single line of text. "You have no idea what you have started." Danny read it once. He read it again. Then he deleted it, leaned back in his chair, and looked out at the stars. He knew exactly what they had started. That was what frightened him, and that was what kept him going. The ultimatum arrived on a Monday. It came through official council communication channels, stamped with the seal of the Zorath hegemony, and co-signed by the remnants of the Council Security Committee. The language was formal, the demands were not. Humanity was to return to the Galactic Council immediately. It would accept a revised membership framework with additional restrictions on military development, territorial expansion, and technology sharing. It would allow the placement of Zorath monitoring stations in the Sol system, around Earth's own sun, to ensure compliance. The deadline was 72 standard hours. If the deadline passed without agreement, the hegemony reserved the right to take whatever actions it deemed necessary to restore order to the region. Katie Marsh read the ultimatum in her office in Geneva at 6 in the morning. Outside the window, the sky was gray, and the city was still sleeping. She read it twice, set it down on her desk, and sat very still for several minutes. Then she called the War Cabinet. They gathered within the hour: Greg Loomis, Sam Novak, Danny Holt, and Nora Pruitt via quantum link from the outpost, and Laura Briggs from the bridge of the Ironclad. The mood was heavy. Everyone in the room had spent months hoping this moment would not come, and now it was here. Greg spoke first. The Zorath fleet has completed its positioning. Sam's latest count puts them at roughly 60 capital ships with full support formations. That is a serious force. Laura's face was steady on the screen. They are strong, but they are operating far from home. Their supply lines stretch across 3 sectors. If we can hold the initial engagement and disrupt their logistics, their strength becomes a weakness. Can we hold? Katie asked directly. The second and third fleets combined give us 41 capital ships, plus our full complement of fast attack squadrons and defense platforms along the border. We are outnumbered, but we have advantages they do not expect. Our electronic warfare capabilities are at least a generation ahead of anything the Zorath have encountered. Our ships are faster, our sensors are sharper, and our people have been drilling for this scenario for weeks. She paused. We can hold the line, but it will not be without cost. The room was quiet. Katie turned to Danny. What does the diplomatic picture look like? Danny had spent the last 48 hours working the back channels with Nora, reaching out to every contact they had. The news was mixed, but not hopeless. The Keth Dominion is staying neutral, he said. Siulan has no interest in fighting alongside the Zorath, but she will not oppose them either. The Vaelori Commerce Pact has condemned the ultimatum, but has no military to back it up. The 3 breakaway species, the Pelori, Omsai, and Dravine, are too small to send warships. Nora leaned into the frame. But here is the important part. 14 other species have quietly signaled through our channels that they will not support any Zorath military action. Some have gone further. 3 of them have told us they will publicly condemn an attack if it happens. The hegemony may have the ships, but it does not have political cover. If they move alone, and the entire galaxy will see it. Katie absorbed all of this. She looked around the room, at the faces of the people she trusted most, tired, worried, but none of them flinching. She had been elected to lead the Federation in a time of peace, and now she was leading it to the edge of war. The weight of that was enormous, but she did not let it show. We are not going to accept these terms, she said, and we are not going to hide our response behind closed doors. I want every species in this galaxy to hear what we have to say." She recorded her response that afternoon. It was broadcast on every open frequency, in every language the translation systems could handle, reaching every corner of the galaxy simultaneously. She did not insult the Zorath. She did not boast about human strength. She stood at her podium in Geneva and spoke in the same plain, clear tone she had used in every address since the crisis began. "The United Earth Federation has received the ultimatum issued by the Zorath hegemony," she said. "We have considered its terms carefully, and we reject them. We are a sovereign civilization. We will not submit to the placement of foreign military installations around our home. We will not accept membership terms designed to diminish us. We will not be governed by fear." She looked into the camera the way she always did, directly, as if she were speaking to one person rather than billions. "To the Zorath hegemony, I say this clearly. Any vessel that crosses into human space with hostile intent will be met with the full strength of our defense forces. This is not a threat. It is a statement of fact. We did not seek this confrontation, but we will not back away from it." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer, but no less steady. "To every other species listening to this broadcast, I want you to know that Earth's door remains open. We seek honest partnership with anyone who offers it. We seek peace with everyone, but we will not purchase peace at the price of our freedom." The broadcast ended. The 72 hours began to count down. Aboard the Ironclad, Laura Briggs used every one of those hours. She ran the second and third fleets through final coordination drills. She positioned her defense platforms along the most likely approach vectors. She placed Ethan Cole and his fast attack squadron, built around the Starfall, in a flanking position behind a dense asteroid field where Zorath sensors would have difficulty tracking them. And she reviewed the electronic warfare packages that her signals officers had been preparing for months. Systems designed to jam, confuse, and blind enemy fleet coordination at the worst possible moment. Laura was not afraid. She had made her peace with what was coming. But she thought about her crew, about the young men and women on every ship in the fleet who had signed up to explore and protect, not to die in a battle started by politicians who had never worn a uniform. She owed them everything she had. The 72 hours expired at midnight, Council Standard Time. For 6 hours, nothing happened. Some in the cabinet dared to hope that the Zorath were bluffing, that the ultimatum had been a political tool rather than a genuine threat. Then the sensor arrays along the border lit up. 60 Zorath capital ships, flanked by dozens of cruisers, destroyers, and support vessels, crossed the boundary line and entered human space. War Speaker Thrawn, or rather the commander who had replaced the disgraced Thrawn in title, but not in temperament, gave the order to advance in a broad formation designed to overwhelm the human defensive line through sheer numbers. What followed would later be called the Battle of the Pale Boundary, named for the thin line of navigational beacons that marked the edge of human territory. Laura Briggs gave a single order to the fleet: hold the line. The first phase of the battle was brutal. The Zorath advanced in waves, their capital ships laying down massive barrages of plasma fire that lit up the darkness like artificial suns. The human defensive line absorbed the punishment, shields flaring and hulls groaning, returning fire with precision that the Zorath had not expected. Human targeting systems, guided by computational networks far more advanced than anything the hegemony possessed, struck with an accuracy that turned every salvo into a wound. 3 hours into the engagement, Laura activated the electronic warfare systems. The effect was devastating. Across the Zorath formation, communication links dissolved into static. Targeting computers fed false data. Navigation systems showed phantom contacts and ghost signatures. Ships that had been moving in coordination suddenly found themselves isolated, unable to talk to their neighbors, unable to confirm what was real and what was not. In the confusion, Ethan Cole struck. His fast attack squadron surged out from behind the asteroid field and hit the Zorath supply ships that were trailing the main fleet. The supply vessels, lightly armed and not designed for direct combat, were caught completely off guard. Ethan's ships moved through them like a sharp wind, disabling engines and targeting cargo holds with surgical precision. They did not destroy the supply ships, they crippled them, leaving the crews alive, but the vessels unable to support the fleet ahead. Without supplies, the Zorath advance had a clock on it, and that clock was running out. The battle lasted 14 hours. By the end, the Zorath had lost 11 capital ships and dozens of smaller vessels. Their formation was broken, their supply line was severed, and their fleet coordination was in shambles. The order to withdraw came not from the commander, but from the Zorath government itself, which had been watching the battle data in real time and understood what the numbers meant. The human losses were real. 4 destroyers and 1 cruiser were gone, along with the souls who had crewed them. Laura Briggs felt every one of those losses like a physical blow, and she would carry them for the rest of her life. But the line held. As the Zorath fleet pulled back across the boundary, Laura opened a communication channel on the broadest frequency available. Her message was short. To the Zorath fleet, your wounded vessels may use our medical frequencies. We will render aid to any crew that requests it. For a long time, there was no response. Then, one by one, 3 damaged Zorath frigates quietly switched to the human medical channel and requested assistance. Laura dispatched rescue teams immediately. Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched the aftermath in silence. A young species, outnumbered and outgunned, had held its ground against one of the most powerful military forces in the known galaxy. And when the battle was over, it had offered help to the people who had tried to destroy it. No one in the Galactic Council chamber said a word. There were no words for what they had just witnessed. 6 months had passed since Danny Holt walked off the speaking platform of the Galactic Council, and the galaxy he had left behind barely resembled the one he remembered. The Council was dying, not in fire or in war, but in the slow, quiet way that institutions die when no one believes in them anymore. High Arbiter Vorthan had resigned 3 weeks after the Battle of the Pale Boundary, not because he was forced out, but because there was nothing left for him to lead. The voting records for Resolution 4117 had been leaked to every news network in the galaxy, likely by someone on his own staff, though no one ever proved it, and the truth they revealed was damning. Only 2 species had voted for the resolution, the Keth Dominion and the Zorath Hegemony. A handful of others had abstained, choosing silence over principle, and the rest, the vast majority of the Council's membership, had never even been told the vote was happening. The resolution had been passed in a closed session, buried in procedural language, and hidden from the very body it was supposed to represent. The reaction was not immediate outrage, it was something worse. It was a slow, spreading disgust, the kind of feeling that comes when you realize the people you trusted were never trustworthy at all. Delegations that had sat in the council chamber for centuries began to question everything they had been told. If one resolution could be hidden, how many others had been? If 2 species could rewrite the rules in secret, what else had they done? Ambassador Sulon of the Keth Dominion moved quickly to limit the damage. She appeared before the chamber with the polished grace she was known for, and publicly disavowed Resolution 4117. She called it the work of a previous administration, a mistake that did not reflect the values of the current Keth government. She expressed regret. She called for healing. The intelligence that Sam Novak's teams had uncovered, and which humanity had quietly shared with its growing list of allies, showed that Sulon herself had been involved in the lobbying effort for years. She had sat across the table from Danny Holt dozens of times, shared meals with human diplomats, and smiled while her government worked to cage humanity behind its back. The evidence was not dramatic. It was worse than dramatic. It was thorough. Sulon retained her position, but her influence evaporated. The Keth Dominion found itself isolated in a way it had not experienced in over 1,000 years. Trade partners pulled back. Diplomatic channels cooled. The elegant web of alliances that the Keth had spent generations building began to unravel, one thread at a time. The Zoroth hegemony was in even worse shape. The military humiliation at the Pale Boundary had shaken the hegemony to its foundations. War Speaker Thrawn, who had championed the ultimatum and the attack, was stripped of his title and removed from power. The details of his removal were kept internal, but the result was visible to everyone. The loudest voice calling for humanity's containment was gone. What surprised the galaxy was what happened next. Internal factions within the Zorath hegemony, younger leaders, reformers, officers who had watched the battle data and understood what it meant, began reaching out to human diplomats directly. They did not go through the council. They did not ask for permission. They simply made contact and asked if it was possible to talk. Danny Holt took those calls personally. He was careful, measured, and honest. He did not gloat. He did not lecture. He listened to what the Zorath reformers wanted. And he found that what they wanted was not so different from what humanity wanted. Security, trade, and the freedom to develop without being controlled by a system that served the interests of a few at the expense of everyone else. These conversations were the beginning of something, though it would take time to see what shape it would take. While Danny worked the diplomatic channels, Nora Pruitt was building something far more ambitious. For months, she had been the quiet center of a growing network of communication between species that had lost faith in the Galactic Council. What had started as informal inquiries had grown into structured conversations, and those conversations had produced a shared vision. Nora, working from the neutral outpost with a small team of diplomats and legal scholars, had drafted the founding document for what she called the Sovereign Accord. The Accord was not a replacement for the Galactic Council. Nora was very clear about that from the beginning. It was something new, a voluntary coalition built on principles that the Council had claimed to uphold but never actually practiced. Transparency was the first principle. Every vote, every resolution, every decision would be recorded and made available to all members. There would be no secret sessions, no buried clauses, no hidden agendas. The second principle was equality. Membership in the Accord would not be tiered by age, military power, or economic weight. Every species would have one voice, and that voice would carry the same weight as any other. An attack on one member would be treated as an attack on all, not as a suggestion to form a committee and discuss options. 21 species signed the founding charter in a ceremony held on the Peluri homeworld, a deliberate choice that honored the first species brave enough to stand with humanity when it would have been easier and safer to stay silent. The Peluri, the Omsai, and the Dravine were among the first signatories. They were joined by 14 of the species that had reached out to Nora during the crisis, plus 4 new members who had been watching from the edges of galactic politics and decided that this was the moment to step forward. Danny Holt was offered the position of the Accord's first speaker, its public voice and ceremonial leader. He turned it down the same day. He was sitting with Katie Marsh in a conference room on Earth when he explained his reasoning. Katie had expected his decision, but she wanted to hear him say it. "If I take that role, it becomes a human institution," Danny said. "Every species in the galaxy will look at the Accord and see Earth leading another empire. That is the opposite of what we built. It needs to belong to everyone." Katie nodded. "Who then?" "Ishali," Danny said without hesitation. He was talking about the Peluri diplomat who had been the first to publicly condemn Resolution 4117, a quiet, principled leader who had risked her career and her safety to speak the truth when the truth was dangerous. She has the respect, she has the courage, and she is not human, which is exactly the point. Ishali accepted the role with the kind of humble grace that made people trust her. She addressed the founding members in a speech that was short and simple, and which ended with words that would be remembered for a long time. We are not here because we are powerful. We are here because we are honest. Let that be enough. On Earth, Katie Marsh addressed the Federation one final time about the crisis. She spoke from the same podium in Geneva, with the same plain backdrop and the same direct gaze. 6 months ago, we made a choice, she said. We chose to leave a system that had betrayed us. We chose to stand alone rather than kneel together. That choice cost us. It cost us trade, stability, comfort. It cost us lives, brave men and women who gave everything to hold a line that should never have been drawn. She paused, and for a moment the weight of those losses was visible on her face. But that choice also showed us something. It showed us that sovereignty is not a gift that someone else grants you. It is a decision you make about yourself, about who you are, and what you are willing to accept. We decided that we would not accept being managed, contained, or diminished. And because we made that decision, 20 other species found the courage to make it too. She straightened. I hope that one day the Galactic Council will reform. I hope it will become the institution it always claimed to be. And if it does, perhaps humanity will return to that chamber. But we will return as equals, and only when trust has been rebuilt through actions, not promises. Until then, we will build something better. We have already started. The broadcast ended, and across human space, people sat with the weight of her words, and felt something they had not felt in a long time. Not pride exactly, but something close to it. The feeling that they belonged to something worth belonging to. In the final days of that long 6 month, Captain Ethan Cole brought the Starfall into dock at a small Peluri station on the edge of their homeworld's orbit. His crew had been running supply missions for weeks, and the routine had become familiar. Dock, unload, refuel, and move on to the next stop. It was not glamorous work, but it mattered, and Ethan's crew took pride in doing it well. As the cargo was being offloaded, a young Peluri dock worker approached Ethan on the loading platform. The worker was nervous, fidgeting with the tools on their belt, but clearly determined to say something. Ethan waited patiently. I wanted to ask you something, the worker said. What does it feel like to be human? Ethan blinked. It was not the kind of question he was used to getting. He thought about it for a long moment. About Earth, about his crew, about the battle and the silence and the long months in between. About all the people who had made choices that were hard and frightening and right. Honestly, he said, most days it just feels like showing up and doing the right thing, even when it is hard. Especially when it is hard. The dock worker thought about this. Then they nodded slowly, as if the answer made perfect sense. Ethan smiled, clapped the worker gently on the shoulder, and walked back to his ship. An hour later, the Starfall undocked and glided out into open space. The stars stretched ahead in every direction, endless and indifferent and beautiful. Behind them lay a broken old order, and the wreckage of the system that had ruled the galaxy through secrecy and control. Around them, fragile and new and full of uncertain promise, was the beginning of something better. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. It had not sought power or revenge or dominion. It had simply refused to be diminished. And in doing so, it had reminded every species watching that the most powerful thing in the universe is not a weapon or a fleet or an empire. It is the decision to stand up and say, quietly and clearly, that you deserve better, and then to build it. The grand atrium of the Galactic Council Station was the largest structure ever built by any known civilization. It hung in the blackness of space like a ring of pale gold, orbiting a dead star that no one had bothered to name. Inside, the chamber stretched so wide that clouds sometimes formed near the ceiling. Thousands of delegations sat in their alcoves, arranged in tiers that rose like the inside of a bowl, and at the center of it all stood the speaking platform, a disk of polished stone where the voices of empires had echoed for over 900 years. Danny Holt had never stood on that platform. In the 5 years he had served as Earth's chief ambassador to the Galactic Council, he had spoken from the human alcove, a modest section near the upper tiers where the younger species were placed. The location was not an accident. Humanity had only been part of the galactic community for 62 years, and in the eyes of civilizations that measured their histories in tens of thousands, 62 years was barely a heartbeat. Danny was a calm man by nature. He had grown up in a small town in Ohio, studied languages in college, and stumbled into diplomacy almost by accident. He was not the kind of person who raised his voice or made dramatic gestures. He believed that the right words, spoken at the right time, were more powerful than any weapon ever built. That belief was about to be tested. The message arrived on a Tuesday, Earth Standard Time. It came through an encrypted channel from Sam Novak, director of Earth's Intelligence Bureau. Danny was sitting in his small office aboard the human diplomatic ship, drinking coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, when his screen blinked with a priority alert. He opened the file and began reading. By the time he finished, the coffee was forgotten. Resolution 4117. It had been passed 3 standard cycles ago, buried inside a package of trade regulations that no one outside the inner council would bother to read. The language was dense and technical, designed to bore anyone who looked at it too closely. But buried in that language was a single, devastating clause. Humanity's voting rights on all matters concerning territorial expansion and military development had been revoked. Earth had been reclassified from a full member to a provisional member, a status that had not been used in over 400 years. No one had told the human delegation. No one had even hinted at it. Danny sat very still for a long time. Then he opened a quantum link channel to Earth and called Katie Marsh, the Secretary General of the United Earth Federation. Katie was in her office in Geneva when the call came through. She listened without interrupting as Danny explained what he had found. When he finished, there was a silence that stretched across the light years between them. "How long have they been planning this?" she asked. "Sam thinks years," Danny said. "Maybe longer." Katie closed her eyes. She was a practical woman, a former governor who had risen to the highest office on Earth through hard work and a talent for seeing through nonsense. She did not panic. She did not rage. She thought. Within the hour, she had assembled the full cabinet. Greg Loomis, the defense secretary, wanted to make a show of force immediately. Nora Pruitt, Danny's second-in-command and the sharpest negotiator in the Federation, argued for a careful, measured response. Sam Novak laid out the intelligence picture in his flat, factual way. The resolution was real, the reclassification was already in effect, and there were signs of a second resolution, in draft, that would authorize monitoring stations around Earth's own solar system. The room went quiet at that. Katie let everyone speak. She asked questions, she weighed the options, and then she made her decision. "We are not going to beg," she said. "We are not going to bargain with people who lied to us. Danny, request an audience before the full chamber. I want every species in that room to hear what happened." Danny did as he was told. He filed the formal request with the Office of High Arbiter Vorathon, the Supreme Chairman of the Galactic Council. Vorathon was a Dralith, a species of tall, gray-skinned beings who had led the Council for centuries, and who considered themselves the wise elders of the galaxy. When Vorathon received the request, he hesitated. He knew what Danny might have found. but refusing the request would look worse than granting it. So he approved it. The next morning, Danny Holt walked down from the upper tiers and stepped onto the central speaking platform for the first time in his career. The chamber fell silent. It was unusual for a junior species to address the full assembly, and the sight of a single human standing on that ancient stone disk drew every eye in the room. Danny did not shout. He did not accuse. He simply held up a data tablet and began reading the full text of Resolution 4117, slowly and clearly, pausing after each clause so the translation systems could render his words into every language spoken in the chamber. The silence deepened with every sentence. Many of the delegates had never heard of the resolution. Some leaned forward in their seats. Others looked at their neighbors with confusion and growing alarm. When he finished reading, Danny lowered the tablet and looked out at the thousands of faces watching him. The United Earth Federation was not informed of this resolution, he said. We were not consulted. We were not given the opportunity to respond. Our rights were taken from us in secret by people who sat across from us at this very table and smiled while they did it. He paused, letting the words settle. Effective immediately, the United Earth Federation is severing all diplomatic ties with the Galactic Council. We are withdrawing our delegation, recalling our ambassadors, and suspending all agreements pending a full review. This is not a negotiation. This is a notification. The chamber erupted. Voices roared from every tier. Vorthan slammed his staff of office against the floor so hard the sound echoed like thunder. Ambassador Sulan of the Keth Dominion was on her feet, calling the move theatrical and reckless. A dozen other delegates were shouting over each other. The noise was deafening. Danny did not engage with any of it. He gathered his tablet, turned his back on the chamber, and walked off the platform. Nora Pruitt and the rest of the human delegation fell in behind him, and together they walked through the corridors of the station to the docking bay where their shuttle waited. As the shuttle detached and pulled away from the enormous ring of the council station, Danny watched it shrink through the viewport. Somewhere behind him, the chamber was still in chaos. Somewhere ahead of him, the future was completely uncertain. At that same moment, across 47 worlds, every human embassy began transmitting an identical automated message. The United Earth Federation has withdrawn from the Galactic Council. All diplomatic personnel are recalled. Humanitarian channels remain open. All other agreements are suspended pending review. The message was short, professional, and final. In the 600 years since the Galactic Council had been founded, no species had ever walked away. Wars had been fought within its framework. Empires had risen and fallen under its watch. But no one had ever simply stood up, said enough, and left.